This is In Character. I'm your host, Gerard Robinson, Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation. And this time, we have an opportunity to speak to educators about the role they see families playing in the work that they do every day. Here at the Institute for Advanced Studies of Culture at the University of Virginia, we actually conducted a study where we included 3,000 teens and 3,000 parents to talk about the role of education in the moral formation of students, whether it's an institution like a school or an institution like an after-school program, faith-based institution, or other. But when we have conversations with educators, they do a great job working with students, but they also work with families, and we often overlook the important role that plays in the profession. And so we're going to have that conversation tonight. What I'd like to do is for each educator to introduce him or herself, tell us your first and last name, grade level you teach, and what state you represent. So I'm going to give one person I met in the previous life first dibs, and that is Megan.
Hi, Gerard. Great to see you. My name is Megan Allen. I am the 2010 Florida Teacher of the Year and a National Board Certified Teacher. I formerly taught 4th and 5th grade in special education, and I am currently a small business owner serving, supporting, and empowering parents in Western Massachusetts.
Elizabeth, we'll go with you.
Hi, I am Elizabeth Miner. I'm the 2014 Colorado State Teacher of the Year, and I teach kindergarten through 5th grade physical education in Lakewood, Colorado, and I have previously taught middle school also here in Colorado.
Allison.
Hi, my name is Allison Riddle. I'm the 2014 Utah Teacher of the Year. After 26 amazing years in 3rd and 5th grade, I am now the elementary mentor supervisor in my district. I've done that for about 4 years, and I designed the mentoring experiences for about 350 elementary teachers.
Luther.
Luther Joseney. I'm just a teacher in this year. All the rest of you guys are awesome teachers of the year. So great to be in y'all with you all. I'm in Boston, Massachusetts, 7th grade. I get the pleasure to serve kiddos out of Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm a history teacher.
Nice. Andrea?
Well, Luther, I'm just a teacher too, and I think it's the greatest thing to be. My name is Andrea Peterson, and I am an elementary music teacher, having done that for 24 years now. I've taught in 2 different states, Washington and now California.
Gary.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Aboud from Detroit, Michigan. I'm the 2014 Michigan Teacher of the Year. Formerly, I taught high school science and technology and have since moved into private practice educational consulting, where I do executive coaching for individuals and families to help them with personal, professional, and academic life.
Katy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Katy Smith, and I come to you from lots of places in Minnesota. I am a parent educator, which means my students are parents. I support them in an early childhood setting in my own classroom and in home visits, prenatally all the way up until 3rd grade. So delighted to be part of the conversation. I am the 2011 Minnesota Teacher of the Year.
And as those who are watching and those who will listen, you see that we have a great combination of teachers from different parts of the country. I've actually had a chance to step foot or do research or work in all of your states one way or another. And so we've got some good people here. So here's the first question. Why is it important for families, from your perspective, for parents in particular, why is it important to the culture of learning in your classroom or in your educational setting in general? And I'm not going to call on any one person. Just feel free to jump in as you like.
I can start. My name is Katy again, and I will tell you, when I got married 38 years ago, I thought I was marrying one person. But I certainly learned really quickly that part of the culture of our marriage relationship was his family and my family. I think the same is true of kids in schools. Unless we consider where they live, who else is instrumental in their becoming the people that they're becoming, we miss a boat and we miss the context of the culture of who they are and what those folks have as an opportunity to bring and influence our own culture in our own classroom. So it's just the lens that I look through, not just a child in a classroom, but where else does that child spend the time and who else is engaged in educating this child with us.
You know, I would add to that, when I first started teaching, I was, 22 years old, and I thought nobody loved the students in my classroom more than me, right? And I worked in a really high needs school, and I judged a lot of parents. I'm just going to be really straight up honest and say that I thought those parents were not invested in their children. And then I had my own child. And when I had my first child, I started, first of all, to get a little bit more of a realistic view about what life is like and what it's like to pay bills and what it's like to pay mortgage and what it's like to do all the things that parents are trying to do as they go through life. But I also started to realize that every parent loves their child. And there is nobody more invested in my students' success than their parent. And I am pretty invested. But I think that was a real turning point for me in my career when I started to see these parents, they're my partner. I'm not working against them, I'm working with them. And it also very quickly, when I changed that attitude, I realized that I could get a lot more done with the kid, because you know what? Kids want, they want to please their parents. It's in their nature. They want their parents' approval. And so it has to be a partnership. And I think that was a real aha for me early in my career.
Well, I'm going to play your part to my 3 daughters. They need to hear this about trying to please your parents, but we'll get to that later.
I think that was so well put. If I could add just a little bit to that, Andrea, I think just in my similar experience, you come into the craft, and I think just the training and everything that you do, it's all about, reshaping your own mindset and the tools that you bring to the classroom. So much so that, we become like these heroes in our mind, and our view of the craft becomes almost like salvific in a sense, like we're coming in and we're saving and we're doing all this stuff. And really what that is, it's arrogance, right? It's a little bit of arrogance. Well, a lot bit of arrogance, because we find ourselves to be central to the craft, and we're not. And I think over time we learn to put our students as they're the central piece of the craft, not us. All the things that we learn, all the stuff that we do, it puts them as central. And I think once we're able to put things into their proper perspective, and the students are central to the work, then we realize our place is resources. And so the way that as I've grown in the craft is to look at it is I'm just a resource for families and for students. I'm there to equip and to engage and to help teach, but that I'm not the central figure in my students' life. I do not have the most impact in my students' life. That it will ultimately be the parent or guardian. And so my job and kind of the way that I see myself work is to again put my students at the center, so that I think shapes the way that we look at the craft. So like then, a lot more home visits happen when the students are central. When we're thinking about a lot more community visits happen when the students become central. A lot more thinking about the ways that, even something as simple as the times that we have parent-teacher conferences, those things begin to change. And so, and also I think there's a piece where like, I made the same mistake where I thought that engagement equaled love. So it was like, okay, I don't see this parent. So they obviously, they obviously don't. But then, over time you get to learn that kind of time, that engagement, that involvement is really can be an indicator of socioeconomic status. And that extra time is a luxury that you have when you have it, right? So yeah, there's so much that goes into it, but I really resonated with that, Andrea.
You know, Luther, that really makes me think of something that I didn't learn as quickly in my career. So spending some time teaching at the high school level, the parents had less of a maybe hands-on approach to their children and the students that I was teaching because of their age. But eventually I got to be an elementary school principal, and I got to see that there's a much different level of engagement between parents depending on the age. And so, you know, one of the things that you said made me kind of think, parents are kids' first teachers. And even before they've gotten to us, no matter what grade level we teach or what age group, they've had their parents as their teachers. And those parents are great teachers. They have taught their kids way more than we can teach because they've had that direct and everyday contact. And they're sending us the best kids that they have. And so I think, you know, just to kind of add on to that centralized role, I think it is definitely revolving around the child, but keeping in mind, for me, I think one of that most important learnings that I've had is that the parents are teachers too, and that doesn't stop once kids start going to school.
And to piggy on top of that, Gary, in physical education, teaching kids, you have kids coming into a classroom, and sometimes they have those basic skills and sometimes they don't. And it's all based off of the information or background information that parents have. And so it's not a ridicule or you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's just a matter of what do those parents have to reference from. So based off of like simple things like locomotive skills and gross motor skills at the elementary level, some of these kids come in able to throw a ball or hold a pencil. But then we've got other kids that come in that don't have those yet because, well, that just wasn't important at home. There are other things that are important. And so sitting here and saying one skill is really important to know before you get into school can be hard because a parent may not believe that. And so you basically have a slate that's not blank. You have a slate that is very colorful, and then you take all of those colors and you basically morph it or change it into a masterpiece. And so parents are essential to the whole education process because they're modeling these skills. And so, especially from a health or a physical aspect, if kids are seeing their parents do these things, they're more willing to do them themselves, and they create those healthy habits. For some families, that's just not an option. You know, we've been working with our food hub banks, trying to get fresh vegetables, fresh meat, better foods into their foods going home because they can't go to a grocery store and buy all natural and organic. But sometimes their resources don't give them the food they need to be healthy. And so changing that avenue around to be like, you know what can we do for those families so that they do have the building blocks so that they can create those masterpieces and that they have those resources. So definitely at the elementary level, it's fascinating to watch these kids come in, especially at kindergarten or pre-K, and the different levels that they're at, because that's where the parent, you know, started teaching them, and that's where they've started off.
Liz, you pulled me into this idea of your community. I think when we look at ourselves as teachers, we're part of different learning communities, right? You have extended or smaller. You've got the learning community of your faculty, a smaller, more intimate one on your grade level or in your department. And then you've got very broad learning communities that are more associated with your, professional associations. Now, our students have the same kinds of learning communities in their lives. They have the community at school in their class or in all of the different classes if they're in secondary, but they also have learning communities, for example, in sports or in the arts. And then they've got a learning community in their neighborhood. And then they've got this really important learning community at home. And I think we silo education often, that experience for kids just in the classroom. And we think, well, this is where they will learn, is right here. And we forget that our learning is more powerful when we blend it with different learning communities in our lives, in our profession, our students' experience and the depth of their learning would increase if we more often connected to the home and really appreciated and honored the learning that goes on in their home, and then asked them to more apply their learning at home than to just keep it separate. Parents are invariably important to the culture in our classrooms because, again, our kids came from that community at home where they first learned language, where they learned and developed their implicit bias, where they learned about their own culture. They have vocabulary and experiences that they should be using to understand new concepts at school. And we need to give them the chance to do that and honor what they know at home. And hopefully they'll mesh it and share it with their parents.
It's almost like we synced this up and figured it out ahead of time, how we're going from like talking point to talking point and everything's just kind of like weaving together. Allison, I was thinking of this idea of the learning community at home and how that ties so much into like climate and culture and how kids feel, whether they're included or not, and whether their family is looking like other students' families. And just thinking of my daughter, who's 18 months, her favorite book is called The Family Book by Todd Parr. And it talks about how different families look different kinds of ways. And I am coming to this conversation not only as an educator, but as an adoptive mom and as a stepmom, and just thinking about how even the language we use when talking to kids and about their families can help them feel included or not. And just thinking about like how I've been trying to use the word caregiver versus the word parent, because so many of our kids, you know, they don't have these typical parents. They have, step parents, they have grandparents, they have aunts and uncles, they have their first teachers that are not necessarily their biological parents, but are still really important to that learning community and that first learning unit at home. And just thinking about how that impacts my work as an educator. So thank you for bringing that up, Allison, that idea of that learning community. I just wanted to share kind of my thinking around the words we use and how we can be more inclusive and help our kids feel like their families, whether they look typical or not typical, are included in this as well.
And all of you have done a masterful job of talking about what it means to talk about family, adoptive, blended. Kate, you started off by talking about being married and what that meant for your family. And Luther, you talked about the salvific aspect of teaching. And you're in Massachusetts, a state with the first university, the first high school, and one that played a big role in sending people out to the world to educate. And so we've seen that. And Allison, Elizabeth, you've had some similar points, as well as you, as Andrea and Gary being in Detroit. Here's something that I want to just pull on now based upon something you said. What are we getting right as relates to working with families? And I'm going to use families here because it's including caregiver, it's including children inside the house, but could also include extended family, could include people in the community. Define it as you would like, but what are we getting right?
I'll go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Andrea.
All right, I'll go ahead and start off. When Allison was talking about connecting learning communities, I was thinking so much about the things that I see that are most powerful happening in the schools are when the schools are reaching out and not just teaching culture to the students, because we get a lot of that, but bringing the students' culture into the schools. And that is something I can just think of so many different teachers that do amazing work like this. And just like a small thing that I've done in my schools for a few years now is as a music teacher, wanting to pull these kids' lives into the classroom, we do this family folk song project. And basically it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but what song is special to your family? What song did your grandma sing to you? What song did your mom sing to you when you went to sleep? And it is amazing what happens when kids who don't want to sing in music class. I mean, kids who are just like they've got the wall up, but the minute that you say to them, hey, I want to know about your family, I want to know about you, I want to know how you have fun at home, I want to know what it's like for you. And I've had so many amazing experiences, just and then even having like moms and dads, grandmas, grandpas, other caregivers coming to me. I just remember last year I had this lady who brought me all this like baked goods from Syria, because she was so struck that I had asked her first grade granddaughter about a song from her culture. And so she just brought me like stuff I didn't even know what it was. It was delicious. But she was just like that connecting to and from school is so important. And that's just one example. There's far more powerful examples out there of just going and saying, hey, your life, what you've lived, like it was said, parents are our first teachers, families are our first teachers. They're the ones who taught us this. And we have to let these kids know that what they've learned matters. What they learned before they ever got to school, it's super important, and it's part of who they are, and it makes them beautiful and amazing and lovely people to be around. And I think that's just for me, that's just such a striking part of what's going right in our schools.
I just have to jump in. I'm sorry if someone else said they were going to be next. So I love that I have lived long enough to have a group of educators, and it's not just happening here, it's happening all over the nation, that we're feeling vulnerable about talking about the language of it, right? So do we say parent engagement or involvement or parent education or partnerships? That even that conversation is one that everybody is leaning into is really exciting for me. Not just schools reaching out to tell you what you need to know so that you feel like you're a part of this community, but moving you into schools, right? And us moving out of schools and having that relationship not just be a get relationship, but a give and take relationship between parents and families and other community members is really what I love. So moving from parent involvement, so come on in and watch your kids sing in the bleachers, to parent engagement, come on in, how can you make this better? How can we live stream this? What can we do so that you can get here even if you can't get here? To partnership with, tell us what we need to do so that you feel like you're a part of our family and we feel like we're a part of your family. So to me, it really is coming to the place that we understand that we all care for the children that we share.
Before we go to the others, quick hand raise. How many of you work in a Title I school? So for those who are listening, 1, 2, 3, 4 hands are up. How many of you are rural? Okay, so all urban, mostly Title I, and some other types of diversity. Just wanted to put that in for the audience. So who wants to go next? What are we getting right?
I'll hop in and piggyback on what Katy was saying. So what I'm hearing from the families that I serve now is that they're feeling much more included in the learning process. If there were a silver lining with the pandemic and with COVID, it's that families are feeling more like partners. They're feeling like they're in tighter communication with the teachers, and they're feeling like they have a clear idea as to what to do to really support learning at home. So we can keep that hopefully, and that can be something that we bring into public education and education across the board post-pandemic.
Go ahead.
Okay. Another thing. So we talk about, parent involvement or caregiver involvement, engagement. I have found that of the 3 schools that I have now, 4 schools that I've worked at, our schools are hubs. They're like a little central focal point of a community where people can access resources, they can get support, And at a time like this, where we have a pandemic and so many families are being impacted, families that never thought they would be in a position that they are in today, are leaning on their schools a little bit more today. And I think what we're getting right is we're recognizing that, and we're using those buildings, the actual structures themselves, to be like, this is a welcoming place. Anyone and everyone is allowed to come here if they need help. You know, and parents are starting to realize that maybe schools aren't as, you know, a scary place to be. Like, some people don't have great memories of being in school. And so this community aspect, or the central hub of a community, is the school. A lot of people have rec centers, or they have other things, but in Colorado, we have lots of small elementary schools that are just dotted around. And those are the central focus for the community, both with parents that have kids in the school, those that went to school there but don't have any kids in school. So now you're even roping in another group of your community. And we talk about those community families. They're helping teach our youth also as they're coming up in these communities. And so really just what we're getting right is opening those doors up and saying, hey, this is a place for you to get those resources. This is a place to get help. This is a place to feel safe. And I think that's just amazing.
Others? Okay.
Oh,
no, go right ahead, Luther.
Oh, sorry. So I wanted to piggyback on what Megan was saying about like how you know, the silver lining in this pandemic. And so for us last year in March was the time that our schools decided, you know, to go to fully remote, and it was a mad scramble to like figure out, you know, like how are we going to like teach now. And so but there was something about the use of technology, and one thing, so to put it in short, I think using technology better and being and being mindful of I want to say it the right way. Being mindful of all of our families. I'll say. So we gave out. So because of the pandemic, we as a district ensured that all of our kiddos had tech going home. And there was something so, and I thought that was such a beautiful thing. It was a necessity, but it was so beautiful because we understand, we understand the kind of the fear that comes with kids having their cameras on in their homes. But it was beautiful to in those small glimpses get a chance to see kids at home, and we got to see mom walking around. And sometimes I would be teaching, and mom would pop in and and say something, and I'm like a crazy person when I'm teaching. So we're joking, we're having a good time, but it was so beautiful, and we kind of got to see what equity looks like, in a sense, because everyone had the same thing. Everyone had the basic accommodations in terms of technology, whether it was giving people Wi-Fi. But what ended up happening was we had more parental involvement than we ever had. So prior to the obviously people, yes, people are home and all that, but not only were parents involved, but they were engaged. We ended up having a commencement ceremony, and the parental involvement in that was more so than it was what we normally have. All these things that look different. And so I was really, really proud of us as a district for ensuring that we talk about serving all of our families, but it was beautiful to see what happens when we actually serve all of our families. And it was just beautiful just to be in the homes of our of our kiddos, and and seeing their parents involved in ways that we haven't gotten the chance. So that was a really, really good silver lining that has showed up again this year. And it's something that we've capitalized on to try to make as many gains as possible for this year, is ensuring, those touchstone points that we have. Another thing that is beautiful about another thing that I think we're doing right is, again, because of the pandemic, we've had to rethink what a teacher's workload looks like. And so we've had, again, as a district, we've had a chance to kind of restructure contractually what teachers are asked to do. But now I've went from from having 70 kiddos on my caseload to having 12, and having 12 kiddos that I am in charge of has been one of the biggest blessings for this whole thing, because I have 12 families that have direct connection to. And another thing that is great that we're doing is, again, the use of technology. They're not paying me in any way, shape, or form, but talking points, using the app to easily translate to all of our families, and using translation, those translation services. So I can send one text message and it'll go into 12 different languages as needed. That's another beautiful thing that we're doing. Don't worry, when we get to like the terrible things, I got some of those, but there are a lot of great things that this pandemic is affording us in the fronts of education.
I have to piggyback on that, Luther. Brilliant. This definitely, for the first time in the history of public education, we have pushed into families' homes. We've never done this before. But what we're getting right with this is letting them know truly how much we care about kids learning. I think we're like this great staple in every community. As educators, we provide this amazing service. And I don't want to say people have taken us for granted, but we were just something that always clicked along, is just always going. And with the pandemic, we not only had to scramble and find ways to connect with our students. I know in our area, we had administrators and teachers searching, like walking through neighborhoods, making sure that kids had their devices, that they were hooked to internet. We showed communities, not only are we here and do we do a great job, do we want to help? We care. We care so much about your kids. We miss them. And I think we shared that kind of concern and empathy and really love for our communities in a way that we haven't done as well before. Before it was more, I got to get this done. I've got content to teach, get your kid to class. But now it's, I care so much and I miss your student. Let's see how we can, find a way to get your student to come to our live video, lessons if you're still teaching remotely, or we have everything in place in our schools so that your child is safe while they're there. If they're coming in person, we will keep your child safe. I think we've done a great job in showing communities, not only do we do great work, but we care. We care immensely about the welfare of our kids, their emotional wellness, and also, whether or not they learn.
I will actually refashion the question based upon the things I've heard thus far. So before the pandemic, the question, what are we getting wrong? There would have been one set of answers. Now, as we realize we're moving through a pandemic and at some point we'll get beyond it, maybe your answers are the same or maybe they're different. So I'll put the question this way. Knowing what you know right now, what do you think we can do differently to minimize the probability that families will feel left out once things change again?
Ooh, can I go?
Oh,
I think for so long, what we've always had, just to be frank, always had, especially at the schools where I've taught. I've had the pleasure of teaching in 4 districts. The schools that I've taught, it's been, I would say the makeup of the school committees, the school councils has always looked the same. It's always looked the same, and it's never been reflective of the student population in any of the districts that I've had. So, school committees, school councils, these governing bodies for our schools that ultimately help the principal make key decisions, help the district make key decisions, don't look like the populations that we're serving. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why that's a thing. Like, I don't understand why that's a thing. We know all the data that we have about around parental involvement, right? So we know that if you have something higher than a graduate degree, you're 40% more likely to show up to a specific meeting. We have the as of 2016. Similarly, we know, like, in terms of, like, if you're living below the poverty line or above it, there's a 30% variance in your involvement in terms of showing up to your school building. But and so we know the information, and so I think then the question ends up becoming, well, being equipped with all this info, which is, we're in education, so, like, we all love it. We all love to get data. We all love the research. We all love the ideas of the day, or whatever it was, whatever new trend is going on in schools. We love them. We go to them, but we have all this data, and we just leave it as is, and we are okay, and we have been and still are okay with the status quo of, like, who are the people who have the ears of the people in power. And so, like, school committees, school councils, looking at those, thinking about what that looks like. Now we have technology. So do we still need to have school committee meetings every day at 7 p.m.? Right? Is that a thing that we're going to keep doing? Like, we don't understand what it is that we're doing. Are we still going to have parent teacher conferences after school, like after school at 4 p.m.? Is that just a thing that we're going to keep doing, as if we don't realize the parents that we are getting each and every single time are the same parents? Right. And so, like, that's such a disservice. And I think that the message that we send when we do things like that, and we perpetuate, like, these cycles, is that we're showing the voices that we value, and we're showing the voices that we don't. And it's clear to our families. Who whether they feel welcome or don't, or not welcome. And again, I shared in the chat that during COVID, we finally had to walk the walk, and we talk about being anti-racist institutions. But I don't know if the things that can still stay, so school committee meetings can still stay. We've had to rock the boat for things that have had to change, for mad scramble, just for the sake of the mad scramble of figuring out how to do things. We've had to change a whole bunch of things, and those things, we've been fortuitous in that a lot of some of those things have worked. But the things that can still remain the same, I'm curious to see if we will actually be anti-racist in dismantling these, like, in perpetuating these cycles that ultimately empower a specific race of student.
I don't know how we follow that up, Luther. That's super powerful, and I think it's spot on. And, from the perspective that I have seen here in Michigan, in particular in the Detroit area, you mentioned kind of, a couple people have actually mentioned that the pandemic has kind of exposed some inequalities and some, inequities that are out there. And that's certainly something that we've seen here in the Detroit area. So one thing that I would say has not changed, that we've gotten wrong in terms of working with and engaging parents and the community, is the way that we basically give options for schooling has been very one-dimensional for too long. And we've seen now that on a very short time frame, we can pivot and offer options, whether that be hybrid, whether that be remote, whether that be block scheduling, cohort teaching, whatever that might be. We've got all these options that have all of a sudden come together in many places that no one ever thought they could be doable in the last 6 to 8 months. So one of the things I would love to see us move toward is getting off of the clock that we've been on in schools for a century, probably. The Carnegie unit of time that we pretty much make school all about. It has been that time is the constant and learning is the variable. And what we've seen from the pandemic is that we can actually make learning the constant, and we can make time the variable if we were to shift to something that was more competency based. And some of the virtual and remote and hybrid options that are out there are revealing that this is more possible than I think we gave credit to the possibility. So as a quick example of where parents fit into all of this, In the past, I think we've done a disservice to parents in terms of giving them feedback on their children's learning. The grading system that typically happens in most schools is also very one-dimensional. It's very task completion oriented, and it's not necessarily centered on what students know. It's centered on what they do. And the feedback that parents and students get about the learning is very, very simplistic. It's you did not complete this assignment, or you did poorly on this test, rather than here are the things you know, here are the things you don't know, and here's what you know partially. And then here's some instruction about what you can do next to improve. And here are some options and opportunities for you to act on that feedback. If we could move in a system or in a direction that was more competency-based, I think that would be one of the greatest services we could do to parents, because it would provide options and actionable ones for them to be more involved and have more choice in their children's learning.
I think Luther and Gary both are giving us some really like concrete examples of what could be done in the future, and they're exciting examples. One thing that keeps going through my mind though is, Luther, you talked about, you know, how everyone in your district handed a computer to every kid, and I think we're frozen. Are we frozen? No, okay. All right. So Luther talked about how every single kid got a computer, and that happened in my district too. And it was amazing. And I had the same kind of like, wow, everyone has equal access. And 6 months later, I can tell you, we're still 100% virtual. They do not have equal access. We have to, like, that was a good first step in trying to create some equity in technology. But I work at 2 different schools, and I have like the haves at one school and the have-nots at the other school. And my have-nots, their internet is cutting out every 5 minutes. I lose a kid. We have to be thinking, as we think about all of these really positive ideas, that, wow, yeah, this idea of teaching beyond the school day and using technology with the power that it has, we have to be thinking also about making sure that kids have the resources, and it's not just a laptop in their hands. They need to have robust internet. They need to have the ability to have these great conversations and this great learning across the world. There's so much way far away from them that can inspire them to do amazing things. But I'm telling you, my current reality is watching one group of kids at one school where the internet never cuts out, and the other one where every 3 minutes I'm losing a kid. Mrs. Peterson, I can't hear you. Mrs. Peterson, I've got my volume turned up, but my audio cut out. Can I log back off and log back on again? And that's reality, and it's something that we have to continue to address, I think.
One of the things I think about, pandemic or not, is that we start way too late. Minnesota, and I'm sure lots of other states, will kind of talk about half the kids who are coming to school are not ready to learn. And we say that to 5-year-olds, right? They're not ready for kindergarten, but we haven't spent any time talking to parents about what kindergarten is. And now that we do have technology, I feel like it takes a lot of social capital to prepare a child for school that some folks automatically know based on their own experience or their own connections, and some folks don't. And I think we owe it to folks to let them know this is what it takes to prepare a child for school, and how can we support you? And we have the resources. When we think about ourselves a little bit like parent educators and kind of embrace our own expertise about it, I think we could really shine. Like, if I was really concerned about my 6th grader, do all 6th graders talk to their mother like that? Is anyone else having a hard time getting their 6th grader out of bed? Do some of your 6th graders eat a whole box of cereal for breakfast? I'll tell you, I don't want to talk to my pediatrician. The expert in the room is a 6th grade teacher. And so if folks know and embrace that they know a lot about the age and the development of the kids that are in their classrooms, and start sharing that with parents, it could transform the way parents feel about walking into school. Not so much like, I am not I'm not comfortable being here, but here is a whole network of resources and folks who care about me and my child that I feel really confident and competent walking in these doors. So starting early, why not start at birth? Welcome. We're looking forward to meeting your child in 5 years. How can we help support you on this journey of creating a lifelong learner? Not just a child who's ready for kindergarten, but someone who's will help you in this segment of their life to get them ready for life. We're so excited to meet you, and we're here for you.
Katy, you hit something that's been very important to me. And I actually live in the community where I teach. So I kind of have a bigger perspective because I know a lot of the parents in my neighborhood. And we talk a lot and we discuss things. And one of the biggest things that I have found that I feel like we're not doing very well at is reaching those parents that did not have a successful 13 years of education. If that was because the system itself let them down, the system wasn't working for them because they learned differently, trauma, anything like that within those years. And they walked out of education going, not doing that again. And then they have their own kids. And so unfortunately, what I feel like we're not doing very well is building those bridges back with those families and those parents and those caregivers that did not enjoy their time in education. And it's actually the opposite. And unfortunately, because it's a family, it is pushed onto the kids. You know, the kids want to please their parents, but if they know that their parents don't care, well, right there, we have a hard line to build on. And so really mending those bridges with those families and with people that maybe education didn't work for them, and really building the why behind it and getting them involved so that they can see, you know, that it doesn't have to be the same again, generation after generation after generation, that it can actually change. And so it's nice to talk to some of the parents in my neighborhood, you know, that are like, yep, I left high school when I could, you know, got my GED and then went right into the workforce. You know, college wasn't even a glimpse on their map. You know, they wanted to get out and get out fast and be able to do the things they wanted to do. And now they got their own kids in there and they're panicking. They're like, I don't know what to do now, you know, because they're uncomfortable. So I think something that we really need to work on is, again, building those bridges back with those families.
Liz, you're talking the language of grace to me. And both pre and post pandemic, I think we often forget to offer grace to families. We tend to write their stories for them. We tend to assume what is happening at home, and then we make our choices based on that. But it's so important that, again, we don't write a story, that we reach out and build that relationship. As Todd Whitaker would say, build the relationship before you need the relationship. And I don't mean that in any way disingenuously. It's so important. We are building a human, quite frankly, together. And so it's important. I think one thing we have not done very well evenly is really been curious in getting to know families, getting to know what they do, and having them share what they know and share things about their families with our classrooms. And I don't mean, you know, having not just elementary ed where we used to have, you know, parents come in and tell what they did for a living, but really designing learning experiences that would go and be pushed into the home where kids talk to their parents about, you know, how do you use this in your work or in your life, or where have you seen this, or when have you had an experience close to this? I think if we let parents know that we really truly care about getting to know them, that we really want to get to know their families, we would honestly have a much better team. We would build a bigger team. Right out of the gate at the beginning of the year, teachers often share the basic clinical information they think parents want to know. Their policies, classroom management, homework, those kinds of things. When actually, for those of us that have had a kid, you know that the greatest joy is dropping that kid off or putting them on the bus, knowing that they're going into a classroom with a teacher that loves to teach. That's a gift. How can we communicate that to parents? To let them know, not only do I like your kid, but I gotta tell you, I love to teach and we are gonna have some fun here. I think we could do better at building those relationships and really giving grace to parents and having faith in them. And then hopefully that faith is reciprocated back where they believe in us amidst especially such trying times that we're having right now. Because we all want to do well, right? The best.
Love the idea of a relationship conference before you have an academic one, right? So who are you? Tell me about your baby. Why did you name him that? He's so interesting. Oh my God, he loves art. And tell me why. Tell me what that's rooted in. I agree, Allison. When you can reflect that you're crazy about somebody's baby, you go a long way in building a relationship. And save the data, save all that for another time. And that might be the best way we use Zoom after this, right? Is to just let me meet you face to face. What works for you? Put the kids to bed and let's have 15 minutes to talk about your child and you and me and how we can do right by your child, which would be so lovely. I love that idea.
Katy, you said something really interesting. Why don't we start earlier? And you work with young children and therefore families who are with them. I can tell you that college, high school, and athletic leagues, they reach out to our parents if they see a glimpse of athletic prowessness in young people, or if they happen to come from a family or a zip code that somehow seems to produce those people, they reach out to them early. And I'm glad you brought that up because we'll do it for sports. Mm-hmm. Why not do it for students independent of sports? And then Andrea, your part about losing students every 2 or 3 minutes, the number of teachers who have said that's real. And so we cheer what Luther and Gary said. We're making sure you have the tablet, but we know from a report from the GAO that 17 million children don't have internet access at home. And so we're having to create buses and spots and other places for our people to line on to. And one thing we could do, and this has been a push toward the FCC at the federal level, is we have E-rates, but they apply to schools and they apply to libraries. There's probably not have a conversation to include homes in that, but that's just food for thought. As we close, I've got just one final question for all of you. We talked about family, and right now this is a family conversation. We made ourselves vulnerable about our personal foibles, what we thought about families, what we like and what we don't like. Tell me one thing you're going to take away from this conversation that you're going to use starting tomorrow to change how we influence the culture of learning, whether it's through your school, through your nonprofit organization, or a combination thereof. And I will go backward this time. I'll start with Katy.
Thanks. I think I will volunteer for a campaign. It starts with equity, right? And it's important of who we elect and who we have in office, and to make sure that folks that we support have their eye on making schools equitable for every student. So I think I will phone bank for a candidate. I've been on the fence, but I think I'll go for it then after this conversation in honor of our time together. So thank you.
Thank you. Allison, what's yours?
You know, I do a lot of professional learning sessions with teachers, and I usually only talk about communicating with parents in one of those 8 sessions. And now I can see that I need to weave in almost every session, how my teachers can make connections with parents with the different structures and best practices that they're learning. It's really got to be more part of their practice, especially now that we are pushing more into home. So thank you for inspiring me to really inspire my teachers.
Thank you, Allison. Megan.
Only one thing?
Gotta take one.
So put aside any assumptions that we have and do that by just listening, and talking less.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Megan. Luther.
Yeah, I don't know about that one thing. I got maybe one and a half. The so many great points made. That really resonated with me deeply, and it's always encouraging being around people who love the craft. So I just want to just say thank you all for allowing me to come in and listen to you all. But I think that piece about relationship conference before the data relationship conference before the academic conference, I think was the quote. I really do love that, and it's making me think even deeper about another piece. Yeah, I'm gonna weave in too, is thinking about the learning communities, and that makes me think about the learning communities, right? How I'm thinking about how I can foster a learning community and better capitalize off the communities that my kiddos have. So I'm thinking about how do I get my parents involved with one another. So that kind of brought that to mind a little bit. Sorry, I added an extra one.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Luther. We'll go to Andrea.
All right. I was thinking about relationships too, and it's kind of funny. I've actually traveled all over the world making speeches about how important relationships are. That was sort of like my big thing when I was doing more of that. And I just sitting here and listening to everybody talk, you can know something, but to have it reminded, to remind yourself of it. And the thing that I was thinking when you guys were talking about the relationship conference, that really like stuck with me too. My son, when he was in kindergarten, I went to his first conference, and his kindergarten teacher had no papers on the table. She had nothing to talk to me about his learning. She just had like this paper doll cutout, and it said Jacob, his name in the middle. And she had written all over it characteristics that she had observed in my son. And as a mom, it was the best gift any teacher has ever given me. And that thing about like, if you see my baby, I will give my left arm for you. Like, that's just if you see my baby. And I was thinking, I've just throughout this whole conversation, I've been thinking, I'm going to reach out to parents and show them that I'm seeing their babies. It's more than just the relationship with the student, but that's really what stuck with me.
Thank you, Andrea. Elizabeth, your thoughts?
So this reminded me of a little story from last week. One of my kiddos, I teach at two schools, and I have 500 kids that I see over the course of 9 days, which is a lot. That's a lot of families. But the other day, I got to make an amazing phone call on a Friday. One of my students who's been getting in a lot of trouble, not a whole lot of positive. I'm brand new to the school. So of course there's talk. You hear, oh, you've got so-and-so, watch out. And it drives me nuts because I want to find out who that kid is myself. And he had a rough day with me, and we kind of drew some boundaries and some lines. And the next day he showed up and he was incredible. And I made sure at 3:30, 4 o'clock that I made a phone call before he got home to let his mom know that his baby is amazing, and that he's a great kid, and that he's going to have some tough days, but he's got potential. And there's some great things about that argumentative piece of his personality that is going to take him far. And just to listen to that mom exhale, because most phone calls from the school weren't maybe the most positive, and how gracious she was to hear something wonderful about her son. And I'm trying to figure out, how can I do that for more kids? 500 families, that's a lot, but not even the ones that are struggling, but the ones that are doing really well too, because sometimes they don't get phone calls either because they're so good, So I think it's really looking and balancing, like, do I pick 10 families a week? How can I reach all of those families? in a school year. It's daunting, but I think it's possible.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Gary.
I want to, I think, combine two ideas that stood out to me tonight into one action step. And that is an idea that I heard about starting early, or starting earlier rather, and this idea of giving grace. And I work with families who are across the K-12 and even into the college ages of education. And oftentimes at the younger ages, the executive coaching that I do is a little bit lighter. And as students are older, working with their families is a little bit heavier, and the coaching is a little bit more intensive. So I want to start earlier, but I want to also include this idea of helping families to learn as a skill how to give grace to their teachers and to the learning situations for themselves. Because I would say that one of the hallmarks of the difficulties I see in my client base is that students and their families are sometimes too hard on themselves about learning, and the learning pressure causes a lot of difficulties later on in schooling. And so starting early with giving grace would be my action step that I want to try to work with families on.
Thank you, Gary. As you see, one word that received a lot of currency tonight was relationship. And my takeaway is thinking about this in the, let's say, the metaphysical. We say relation and ship, but we won't know if it's a ship if it remains docked. It's a relationship, but it's a ship that remains docked. Once the ship moves and begins to go out and to sail the seas of uncertainty and to sail the seas that we often may think are dangerous or could be fun, but until we leave the dock, we won't really know what type of ship it is. So my takeaway is to remember that relationships are very similar to what different faith traditions look at with Noah's Ark. We often talk about the two animals. The two animals were then clean animals. The clean ones were the actual seven. And of the seven, one of those, of course, are families. And so as we do our work to work with families, let's find ways to make sure we can include them to sail away from the seas of uncertainty, bad experiences, having phone calls you don't want to hear, having your race, your ethnicity, your language, your sexual type looked upon first before someone sees you, and then judge your child by that, by looking at the age of your child. And because they're so young, oh, they don't know much, when we know they actually, from brain science up to 8, are learning a lot more than we think. And the importance of understanding the difference between parent engagement for someone who's in elementary school versus middle versus high school. And because they're not at every PTA meeting doesn't mean that they're Simon Legree. It may mean something very different. And for those who have nonprofits who are taking years of experience in the classroom to work with them, it also shows the importance of nonprofit institutions in this role, because that's, again, one of the seven. I want to thank all of you for taking time again to have this conversation and to share with us the one takeaway that you have. Again, my name is Gerard Robinson. We are just finishing a conversation about the role of educators in creating learning cultures for families. And thank you for your time.